Where is China succeeding today in Africa that the West perhaps did not succeed?
I think primarily in the field of building these packages of resource extraction in return for infrastructure with some component of aid. It's rather opaque what component of aid is, but
right.
It's certainly the resource extraction in return for infrastructure, I think, is quite an interesting model.
Should aid have been that model in the first place?
I think it would have been sounder. I mean, to be fair, that's actually what aid was doing back in the 1960s, and it moved away from that core project of getting the infrastructure in place. Now, I should say that China's approach is not sufficient, because without improvements in governance, just the hard physical infrastructure will not be enough. In fact, we know that from past experience of China in Africa. In the 70s, China built a massive railroad from Zambia through Tanzania to the coast, the Tazara.
Right.
And this was a huge infrastructure project which potentially would be very useful now. But Zambia, that's not the way Zambia get its copper to the coast, not at all. Tazara's barely functioning because these turnkey projects in which you build a railway and hand it over, it's the soft stuff that matters. It's the ability to have a functioning organization that does the maintenance, that runs things. And so handing over a turnkey operation is not enough.
Do you see China building that soft structure as well? I mean,
no, I don't.
Do you see them becoming more sophisticated?
It will take a leap because the Chinese approach is very much, it's sort of top level deal with government.
But
here.
The ports do get built. The railroads
but they get built
built
entirely by it's an entirely Chinese operation, and so there's no interface.
So with
the
Western approach
with
of
domestic businesses
of the Paris Club and collating the money and then giving it to the locals to do the construction didn't work either.
No, because that was what both failed to do is connect with the African private sector. That the old aid approach over-relied upon just handing resources to government. The Chinese approach is basically the total bypass of African society. Everything is brought in, the Chinese labor, all the Chinese imports. There's your railway.
In a lot of your writing, you seem to focus on this theme called governance. Give us a sense of your construct of what governance means. And you make a distinction between governance and regulation as being two different things.
Yeah, and I'd emphasize economic governance. I think the political governance is between autocracy, democracy. That's a slow thing which takes a long time for a society to evolve. Economic governance is fundamentally about follow the money. And so trying to require and assist in the building of clean systems of money flows. That, I think, is very important. What Africa's suffered from is the opposite. It's very dirty systems of money flows, which have then fed into patronage politics. And that produces the dysfunctional autocracies, in which the power of the autocrat is not used to build a country. It's used to divert resources for his own group.
In a dysfunctional Africa, government itself is strong and overbearing in that sense. Do you see the emergence of private economy, private sector economy? Do you see a kind of a juxtaposition of state and privately run enterprises, evolving? And do you see it taking place in a way that perhaps there are models in East Asia that will provide a kind of a working model? Japan, Malaysia, there's a lot of benevolent give and take between government and the private sector in that sense. A lot of patronage, a lot of you might even call it rent collection system, where the state is held stable as a result of a very successful private sector.
Yes, I mean, I think that on the whole that hasn't happened in Africa because most African leaders have tended to run the show in order to favour their particular group versus other groups. But in some African societies, it is starting to happen, I think.
Okay.
So
just in your sense of what governance should be, do you exclude this rent collection model?
I think the key distinction is whether the interest is basically building the nation or basically diverting resources from one group to another. Right? And I think the Asian model, fundamentally, there was enough sense of nation that both politicians and businessmen had a sense that what they were doing was building the national economy. Now, in the process, business got cozy with government and managed to get some sort of super profits. But it was fundamentally an enterprise in building the economy. I mean, Malaysia would be a very good example, I think, of a remarkably successful case in which the Bumiputra recognized that their interest was not to be so redistributive as to destroy the growth process. So it was a very gentle redistributive process.
But it's a model that worked because the economic pie just kept growing, so there was enough for everybody.
But they chose to let that happen.
Right.
I mean that was the genius.
Right.
Was the recognition that they themselves would be better off by letting that pie grow. Whereas too commonly in Africa, it's been a much shorter term view that you grab the pie. Now there are exceptions to that.
So there's a question here is how do we measure this? Is there a way to measure if resources are being allocated in a way that's going to be constructive for the country, regardless of the mechanics of how it's done? Have you given some thought to that? I
think there's lots of measures now. I mean, there's overall measures of how corrupt societies are. So overall levels of corruption are a pretty good indication of whether you've got societies where the key route to wealth is redistributive rather than growth. Right? Another big source of the redistributive economy is where you get big natural resource rents, because they're in effect unearned, and so there's a high payoff to trying to capture those unearned resources. That's the real fear of what may happen in Africa, is that because you've got this huge injection of resource rents that are essentially unearned, there'll be a political content. The big payoff will be to capture those.
Professor Collier, thank you very much for your insights in these areas.
Thank you.